This video is about 5.5.2 on the November 2017 grade 10 paper 1. In another video I did 5.5.1, and I think it's important to look at that again just to be sure we're clear. When you're solving an equation by looking at a graph, it's important to understand what section of the graph has positive x values. That would be the first and the fourth quadrant. And which quadrants have negative x values? That would be the second and the third quadrant. And the y value, which is the function value, that could be f of x or g of x, is positive in the first and second quadrants and negative in the third and fourth quadrants. So in this problem, you could think of it as g of x or f of x for the y values. And that's helpful in solving any inequality or equation from a graph. So now let's look at 5.5.2 that says x times g of x is less than or equal to 0. Well, if you know that if two things are multiplied together and they are less than 0, that means either the first one is less than 0 and the second one is greater than 0, or the first one is greater than 0 and the second one is less than 0, because in order to get a negative number, you multiply a positive times a negative. So that's going to be helpful in this problem. So either x is less than 0 and g of x is greater than 0, or x is greater than 0 and g of x is less than 0. For now, I'm ignoring the equal signs because that will happen when either x is equal to 0 or g of x is equal to 0, but we'll look at that at the end. So let's consider this first set of conditions. X is less than 0 in the second and third quadrants, here and here, and g of x is greater than 0 in the first and second quadrants, here and here. So in our second quadrant, we have that condition met. So now looking at our graph, that is in this quadrant, and I've highlighted g of x here, and we're looking for the x values where x is less than 0 and g of x is greater than 0, and that's going to be between these 2 points r and t. The x values, which we remember from previous problem, is x values between -2 and 0. Now, if we want to include where this inequality is equal to 0, we would include those boundary values as well. All right, now the second part, x is greater than 0 in quadrants 1 and 4, and g of x is less than 0 in quadrants 3 and 4. So those overlap in quadrant 4. And now we'll look back at our graph and consider where g of x is less than 0 and x is greater than 0, and that is what I've just highlighted, and that will be true when x is greater than 2. And again, we will include when x equals 2 because that would make the inequality true as well. So this is our final solution for this inequality. Okay, let's look at 5.6. The graph H is obtained when g is reflected along the line y equals 0. That is the x-axis. Write down the equation of H in the form of h of x is equal to p times x squared plus k. Well, if I reflect g of x over the line y equals 0, it will look like that, and that 0.08 becomes 0, -8. and it's exactly the same width as g of x was. There are a few ways to do this problem, but we remember from an earlier problem that g of x, the equation for that, was negative 2x squared plus 8. So the h of x opens up, so the a value, or the p value, excuse me, will be equal to 2. And our k value, which is the y-intercept, would be equal to negative 8. Again, there are multiple ways to do this problem, but I think that should suffice.